Alfred Adler died in 1897 while lecturing in Aberdeen, Scotland. He was 67 years old. Sigmund Freud remarked that for a Jewish boy from Vienna's suburbs, dying in Aberdeen proved remarkable success. This bitter comment reveals the depth of animosity between former colleagues. Their split in 1911 marked psychology's first major schism. Adler became the inaugural defector from psychoanalysis, preceding Carl Jung by 3 years. Yet calling Adler merely a defector misses the point entirely. He constructed an entirely different psychology, one that rejected Freud's sexual determinism. Where Freud saw humans as prisoners of unconscious sexual drives, Adler saw creative agents. Where Freud emphasized past trauma, Adler focused on future goals. Adler was born in 1870 in Rudolfsheim, a Viennese suburb. His childhood was marked by illness, rickets, and a brush with pneumonia. He watched his younger brother die in the bed beside him. These experiences weren't mere biographical details, but formative conceptual seeds. From physical weakness emerged his theory of organ inferiority and compensation. From feeling overshadowed by his successful older brother came insights about sibling dynamics. The theory grew from lived experience, not abstract speculation. In 1902, Freud invited Adler to join his Wednesday Psychological Society. Notice the direction of this invitation. Freud sought Adler, not vice versa. Adler was never Freud's student or disciple, despite common mischaracterization. He was a physician and intellectual peer who disagreed fundamentally from the beginning. By 1910, Adler became president of the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society. 1 year later, the collaboration exploded in irreconcilable theoretical warfare. The core disagreement centered on human motivation's fundamental nature. Freud insisted sexuality and libido drove all psychological phenomena. Adler countered that feelings of inferiority and striving for significance were primary. This wasn't a minor technical dispute, but a complete reconceptualization of human psychology. Freud demanded loyalty and theoretical conformity from all society members. He issued an ultimatum: abandon Adler or face expulsion. Adler and 9 colleagues departed, founding the Society for Individual Psychology. The term individual psychology requires careful explanation to avoid immediate misunderstanding. In German, individual means indivisible, not separate or isolated. Adler emphasized the person's fundamental unity and wholeness. You cannot split humans into warring components like ID, ego, and superego. The individual functions as an integrated whole, pursuing consistent goals. Furthermore, this indivisible person exists embedded within social relationships. Individual psychology is paradoxically the most social of early psychological theories. Adler's influence on subsequent psychology vastly exceeds his recognition. Henry Ellenberger noted that no author has been borrowed from more without acknowledgement. Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, Viktor Frankl, and Albert Ellis all credited Adler. Cognitive behavioral therapy's foundations rest significantly on Adlerian concepts. The emphasis on thoughts shaping feelings, on conscious goals directing behavior, originated with Adler. Reality therapy, solution-focused therapy, and family systems approaches carry Adlerian DNA. Positive psychology's focus on strengths and growth echoes Adler's optimistic framework. Yet Adler remains psychology's most plagiarized and least credited theorist. His ideas became so pervasive they seemed obvious, losing their revolutionary character. When someone says behavior is goal-directed or emphasizes social relationships, they unknowingly echo Adler. Understanding his actual system reveals how radical and comprehensive his vision was. Part 1. The Architecture of Striving. Human beings begin life in a position of complete inferiority. An infant cannot walk, speak, feed itself, or control bodily functions. It depends entirely on powerful adults who tower above, possessing incomprehensible abilities. This initial condition isn't pathological, but existentially inevitable for the human species. Every person starts from a felt minus, experiencing profound powerlessness. This universal experience becomes the engine of all psychological development. The feeling of inferiority is not an inferiority complex. This distinction is absolutely critical to understanding Adler's system. Normal inferiority feelings are healthy, motivating forces that propel development and achievement. They create movement, ambition, and the desire to grow and master challenges. An inferiority complex, by contrast, represents a pathological state of paralysis. The person feels so overwhelmed by inadequacy that they cannot move forward. They become stuck, unable to compensate or develop alternative strengths. Consider the underlying logic here with precision and care. If feeling inferior were inherently pathological, all human striving would be neurotic. Adler rejected this Freudian pessimism about human nature's fundamental structure. Instead, he proposed that inferiority feelings serve an adaptive function. They signal gaps between current state and desired state, creating psychological tension. This tension generates movement towards superiority, meaning competence and mastery, not dominance. The drive for superiority is a drive for completion, for overcoming limitations. The terminology here has created massive confusion requiring clarification. When Adler says superiority, he doesn't mean lording over others. He means striving upward, developing capacities, achieving one's potential. A child learning to walk is striving for superiority over their current crawling state. A student mastering mathematics is striving for superiority over their previous ignorance. The movement is from felt incompetence toward felt competence in valued domains. This is fundamentally different from seeking power over other people. Early critics accused Adler of replacing Freud's sexual drive with an aggressive power drive. This criticism completely missed the theoretical shift Adler was enacting. Freud's drives were biological, mechanical forces pushing from behind. Adler's striving was teleological, meaning pulled forward by goals and purposes. The difference resembles physics versus psychology, mechanism versus intentionality. Freudian drives exist in the past as accumulated instinctual energy. Adlerian striving exists in the future as imagined possibilities pulling the present forward. This brings us to Adler's concept of fictional finalism, borrowed from philosopher Hans Weihinger. Humans create imaginary future goals that organize their current behavior. These fictional final goals may never be explicitly articulated or consciously examined. They function as organizing principles, invisible attractors shaping the personality's trajectory. A person might unconsciously organize their life around becoming perfectly loved. Another might strive toward becoming completely independent and self-sufficient. These goals are fictional because they represent impossible ideals, not achievable realities. The fictional final goal develops in early childhood, approximately before age 6. The child, facing overwhelming inferiority and trying to find significance, creates a life plan. This plan answers the question, how can I move from minus to plus? How can I overcome powerlessness and achieve safety, belonging, or worth? The answer varies dramatically depending on the child's specific situation and interpretation. One child concludes that achievement brings value, another that charm wins affection. A third might decide that only perfect control prevents catastrophe. Notice the radical nature of what Adler proposes here. The child is not passively shaped by environmental forces or biological drives. The child is a creative interpreter, constructing meaning from their experience. The child makes decisions about what their situation means and how to respond. Two children in identical objective circumstances can develop completely different life orientations. What matters isn't the objective facts, but the child's subjective interpretation. This constructivist element anticipates cognitive psychology by several decades. Adler stated that meanings are not determined by situations. Rather, we determine ourselves by the meanings we give to situations. This seemingly simple statement contains profound philosophical implications about human freedom. It rejects both biological determinism and environmental determinism. Yes, biology and environment constrain possibilities, providing the raw materials. But the individual creatively interprets these materials, constructing their unique response. This creative power distinguishes individual psychology from mechanistic psychologies. The lifestyle, Adler's term for personality, represents this unified pattern of movement. It encompasses the person's characteristic way of pursuing their fictional final goal. The lifestyle includes cognitive schemas, emotional patterns, and behavioral strategies. All these elements work together, forming a consistent whole. A person with a lifestyle oriented toward achievement thinks in achievement terms. They feel pride when succeeding, shame when failing, strategize to demonstrate competence. Everything hangs together, organized by that underlying goal structure. The lifestyle forms early and remains remarkably stable across the lifespan. By age 5 or 6, the basic pattern is set. This doesn't mean people cannot change, but change requires conscious effort. The lifestyle operates automatically, like a default setting running in the background. Most people never examine their lifestyle's assumptions or question their fictional goals. They simply live out patterns established in early childhood. Therapy, in Adler's view, means making the lifestyle conscious and open to revision. Compensation represents the normal, healthy response to inferiority feelings. When someone lacks strength in one area, they develop strength in another. A physically weak child might compensate by developing intellectual abilities. A shy person might compensate by becoming an excellent listener or observer. Compensation restores balance, allowing the person to achieve a sense of adequacy. It represents flexible adaptation, finding alternative routes to significance and belonging. Without compensation ability, the person develops an inferiority complex and becomes stuck. Overcompensation occurs when someone goes beyond mere balance restoration. They don't just compensate for weakness, but transform it into exceptional strength. The classic example is Demosthenes, who had a severe speech impediment. He didn't just learn to speak adequately, but became history's greatest orator. Overcompensation can produce remarkable achievements and drive exceptional accomplishment. However, it can also become pathological if pursued rigidly or without social interest. The person might become tyrannical, demanding absolute superiority to mask underlying insecurity. Social interest, translated from the German Gemeinschaftsgefühl, represents Adler's most important concept. It means feeling connected to the human community and concerned with collective welfare. Healthy psychological development requires this sense of belonging to something beyond oneself. Social interest is both innate potential and learned skill, requiring cultivation. Infants have the capacity for social interest, but need nurturing relationships to develop it. Parents and early caregivers model concern for others and teach cooperative behavior. When this development succeeds, the person balances self-interest with community contribution. The level of social interest determines whether striving becomes constructive or destructive. A person with high social interest pursues superiority in socially useful ways. They want to contribute, create value, and help others flourish. Their fictional goals orient towards service, connection, and collaborative achievement. A person with low social interest pursues superiority through dominance and exploitation. They see life as zero-sum competition where others' gain represents their loss. Their fictional goals center on personal power, often at others' expense. Adler identified 3 fundamental life tasks all humans must address. First, the task of work or occupation, finding one's productive role. Second, the task of society or friendship, establishing cooperative relationships. Third, the task of love, forming intimate partnerships for procreation and companionship. Later, Adlerians added 2 more tasks: self-understanding and spiritual meaning. These tasks aren't optional extras, but essential challenges defining human existence. How someone approaches these tasks reveals their lifestyle and social interest level. Mental health, in Adler's framework, means having courage to face life's tasks. It means striving for superiority in socially constructive ways. It means feeling connected to others and contributing to collective welfare. Neurosis represents the opposite: discouraged striving that avoids life's real challenges. The neurotic person creates symptoms that justify avoiding work, relationships, or intimacy. They arrange their symptoms to maintain safety while explaining away their withdrawal. Anxiety, for instance, might justify avoiding social situations that feel threatening. Birth order theory represents Adler's most famous and most misunderstood contribution. He proposed that one's position in the family constellation shapes personality development. Firstborn children receive undivided parental attention until a sibling arrives. This dethronement creates specific psychological challenges and typical response patterns. Firstborns often become responsible, achievement-oriented, and concerned with maintaining their position. They may become conservative, upholding existing rules and structures. But Adler emphasized that birth order is probabilistic, not deterministic. Second children grow up always having someone ahead of them. They develop in the shadow of an older sibling who already occupies certain territory. This creates a competitive dynamic, often driving the second child to pursue different domains. If the older sibling excels academically, the younger might pursue athletics or arts. Second children often become ambitious strivers, trying to overtake the older sibling. They may develop revolutionary tendencies, questioning established authority and seeking alternative paths. Again, this describes a common pattern, not an inevitable outcome. Youngest children are never dethroned and often receive special treatment. Multiple older siblings exist as models, and parents may have relaxed with experience. Youngest children might become charming, sociable, and skilled at enlisting others' help. They may also become pampered, expecting others to solve their problems. Some youngest children develop exceptional drive to prove they're not inferior. They strive mightily to show they can exceed all their older siblings' achievements. Others remain dependent, never developing full self-sufficiency. Only children never experience sibling competition or dethronement. They receive sustained parental attention but lack peer-level relationships at home. This creates a unique developmental environment with specific challenges and opportunities. Only children may become comfortable with adults, but struggle with peer relationships. They might develop high achievement orientation without learning cooperation's nuances. They may expect the special treatment they received as children to continue throughout life. Or they might become self-sufficient, comfortable with solitude and independence. The critical point about birth order is that psychological position matters more than ordinal position. A child born third might function psychologically as a firstborn. This happens when large age gaps exist or when earlier siblings died or left home. The family atmosphere, parenting styles and specific sibling interactions all matter immensely. Adler himself warned against mechanical application of birth order formulas. The theory provides hypotheses to explore, not rigid predictions to impose. Individual creativity means people can respond to similar positions in vastly different ways. Part 2. Organ inferiority and mind-body unity. Adler's first major theoretical contribution came in 1907 with his monograph on organ inferiority. This work predated his split with Freud and initially pleased the psychoanalytic circle. It examined how physical weaknesses or defects influence psychological development and personality formation. Adler observed that certain organs in each person function less efficiently than others. The stomach, lungs, heart, eyes, or specific limb might represent a weak point. Illness tends to manifest in these areas of constitutional vulnerability. The concept emerged from Adler's medical practice and his own childhood illnesses. He suffered from rickets, which caused bone weakness and physical limitations. He nearly died from pneumonia at age 5, an experience that profoundly marked him. These personal vulnerabilities became conceptual resources rather than mere biographical details. Adler noticed that people often develop heightened concern with their weak organs. Someone with weak eyes might become intensely focused on vision and visual phenomena. Someone with respiratory weakness might develop acute awareness of breathing and air quality. The psychological response to organ inferiority follows several possible paths. First, the person might overcompensate by developing that very area into exceptional strength. A child with speech difficulties might become a skilled orator or teacher. Someone with weak legs might become a dedicated runner or dancer. Second, the person might compensate indirectly through related psychological functions. Physical weakness might drive intellectual development or artistic sensitivity. The compensation occurs in a different domain, but restores overall balance. Third, and most problematically, the person might fail to compensate successfully. The organ inferiority then becomes a psychological fixation, creating ongoing distress. The person develops an inferiority complex centered on their physical vulnerability. They might become hypochondriacal, obsessively monitoring the weak organ's functioning, or they might develop neurotic symptoms that prevent engaging life's normal challenges. The physical weakness provides a ready excuse for avoiding work or relationships. Adler saw this as a failure of courage rather than medical necessity. The organ inferiority concept established Adler's holistic psychosomatic orientation from the beginning. He rejected the Cartesian split between mind and body as separate substances. Physical and psychological phenomena represent different aspects of one unified organism. The body expresses psychological states, and psychological states reflect bodily conditions. This wasn't mysticism, but clinical observation of mind-body integration in actual patients. Emotional stress manifests in headaches, digestive problems, muscle tension, or cardiovascular changes. Bodily conditions influence mood, energy levels, cognitive functioning, and behavioral capacities. Adler expanded organ inferiority beyond literal physical defects to psychological application. He proposed that people can feel inferior in any domain of functioning. Social inferiority emerges from lacking connection, popularity, or interpersonal ease. Intellectual inferiority comes from feeling cognitively inadequate compared to others. Economic inferiority reflects feeling poor, unsuccessful, or materially deprived. Moral inferiority involves feeling bad, guilty, or ethically compromised. The specific content varies, but the dynamic remains the same across domains. This expansion transforms organ inferiority from a medical concept into a comprehensive psychological theory. Any area where someone feels lacking can become the focus of compensatory striving. The person doesn't need an actual physical defect to experience inferiority feelings. Perceived inferiority, whether objectively accurate or not, drives the psychological response. A child who believes they're stupid will strive to overcome intellectual inferiority. This occurs even if testing shows their intelligence falls within normal ranges. The subjective interpretation matters more than objective measurement in shaping behavioral response. The holistic perspective meant Adler viewed all behavior as unified and purposeful. Symptoms aren't random malfunctions, but meaningful communications serving specific psychological functions. A headache might express reluctance to engage a difficult task or confrontation. Insomnia might reflect anxiety about losing control during sleep's vulnerability. The person isn't consciously faking or deliberately creating symptoms. Rather, symptoms emerge as creative solutions to psychological problems the person faces. They represent the body-mind's attempt to preserve safety or achieve goals. Adler's holism extended to viewing thinking, feeling and acting as inseparable aspects. These aren't separate faculties that might conflict, but coordinated expressions of lifestyle. What someone thinks, how they feel, and what they do all align toward common goals. If behavior seems contradictory, the analyst hasn't understood the underlying unity correctly. A person claiming to want success while sabotaging opportunities isn't internally conflicted. More likely, they fear the responsibilities or exposures that success would bring. The sabotage serves their deeper goal of maintaining safety even at success's cost. This unified view challenged Freud's structural model with its warring psychic agencies. Adler rejected the idea that id, ego, and superego battle for control. He found this multiplication of homunculi theoretically confused and clinically unhelpful. The person is one, not a committee of competing subpersonalities. Internal conflict, when it occurs, represents hesitation about which path serves one's goals. It doesn't indicate separate selves with incompatible desires fighting each other. The hesitation resolves when the person clarifies their priorities and chooses their direction. Emotions in Adler's system serve adaptive instrumental functions within the lifestyle. They aren't primitive drives or random biochemical events, but purposeful responses. Anger mobilizes energy for fighting obstacles or asserting one's position. Fear motivates withdrawal from threats or prepares for defensive action. Sadness signals loss and may elicit comfort from others or justify withdrawal. Guilt enforces internalized standards and may prevent socially destructive behavior. Each emotion serves the person's movement toward their fictional final goal. People rely on certain emotions habitually as part of their lifestyle strategy. Some individuals use anger as their primary tool for managing relationships and challenges. Others employ anxiety, guilt, sadness or shame as characteristic responses. The habitual emotion isn't randomly selected, but fits the person's overall life plan. An angry person might have concluded early that aggression achieves goals. An anxious person might have learned that worry prevents disaster through vigilance. The emotion becomes a practice technique for navigating life's demands. The holistic view also encompassed the individual's embeddedness in social context. You cannot understand a person by examining them in isolation. Human beings exist always in relationship to family, community, culture, and historical moment. The individual and their social context form one integrated system. Adler's holism thus operates on multiple levels simultaneously and without contradiction. The person is a unified whole, not divisible into conflicting parts. The person is also inseparable from their social and historical context. This multi-level integration distinguished individual psychology from both psychoanalysis and behaviorism. Psychoanalysis focused on intra-psychic conflict within the isolated individual. Behaviorism examined environmental contingencies shaping the organism's responses. Adler insisted that psychological life requires understanding the whole person in social context. Neither internal drives nor external reinforcements alone explain human behavior. The person creatively interprets their situation and pursues self-chosen goals. This creative, goal-directed activity within a social field defines human psychological existence. Part 3. The social fabric of existence. Social interest stands as the cornerstone of Adler's mature psychology. It represents the most important criterion for mental health and human development. Gemeinschaftsgefühl in German carries richer connotations than English translations typically capture. It means community feeling, social feeling, a sense of fellowship with humanity. It involves feeling at home in the world among other people. It includes willingness to cooperate, contribute and work for collective welfare. It encompasses both feeling connected and accepting responsibility for that connection. Adler proposed that social interest exists as innate potential within every human being. We're born with the capacity for social feeling, but not its automatic development. Like language capacity, it requires proper environmental conditions to actualize fully. The infant's helplessness makes cooperation with caregivers essential for survival. This biological dependence creates the foundation for social interest development. But dependence alone doesn't guarantee genuine community feeling will emerge. Nurturing relationships and encouragement from caregivers are absolutely necessary for healthy development. The mother typically represents the first relationship where social interest develops or fails. If she provides warm, responsive care while also connecting the child to others, social interest flourishes. She models concern for the child's welfare and teaches concern for others' welfare. She mediates the child's relationship to the father, siblings, and broader community. But if the mother pampers the child excessively or neglects them entirely, problems arise. Pampering teaches the child that the world should serve their needs exclusively. Neglect teaches that the world is hostile and others cannot be trusted. The father's role involves representing the wider world beyond the mother-child dyad. He models how to engage productively with work and social responsibilities. He demonstrates partnership with the mother, showing cooperation between equals. His relationship with each child and among siblings influences family atmosphere profoundly. When parents work cooperatively and treat children with respect, social interest develops naturally. When parents compete, dominate, or create hierarchical power structures, social interest suffers. The child learns either democratic cooperation or authoritarian domination from these early models. Family atmosphere refers to the emotional climate and value system pervading the home. It includes whether the family emphasizes achievement, conformity, creativity, or material success. It encompasses attitudes toward gender, social class, education, religion, and ethnic identity. These atmospheric qualities shape what the child considers important and valuable. A family valuing academic achievement creates different developmental conditions than one valuing athletic prowess. A family emphasizing service to others creates different conditions than one prioritizing personal advancement. The child absorbs these values often without conscious awareness or critical examination. The family constellation includes structural factors like family size and birth order positions. It encompasses the relationships between siblings and each child's relationship with parents. It includes who holds power, how decisions get made, and what behaviors receive encouragement. Each child occupies a unique position within this constellation with different opportunities and challenges. One child might become the responsible helper, while another becomes the charming entertainer. A third might become the problem child, attracting attention through misbehavior. These roles emerge through complex interactions among all family members over time. Adler emphasized that misbehaving children are discouraged children seeking significance through mistaken methods. The child wants to belong and feel valued, but pursues these goals destructively. They might seek attention through negative behavior when positive methods seem unavailable. They might pursue power through opposition and defiance when cooperation feels impossible. They might seek revenge for perceived injustices or withdraw into inadequacy and helplessness. Each pattern represents a mistaken conclusion about how to achieve belonging and significance. The solution isn't punishment, but encouragement and teaching better ways to contribute. Encouragement represents Adler's alternative to reward and punishment in child rearing and education. Punishment teaches fear and external control, but doesn't develop internal motivation or social interest. Rewards create dependency on external validation and undermine intrinsic engagement. Encouragement focuses on effort, improvement, and contribution rather than achievement or perfection. It helps children develop confidence in their abilities and courage to face challenges. It teaches that mistakes are learning opportunities rather than evidence of worthlessness. It emphasizes the child's value as a person independent of performance or achievement. Early recollections, meaning a person's earliest memories, reveal their fundamental life orientation. Adler discovered that what people remember from early childhood isn't random or arbitrary. We selectively remember moments that confirm our basic convictions about life. The memories might not be factually accurate, but are psychologically true. Someone whose earliest memory involves being hurt remembers feeling vulnerable and unsafe. Someone remembering a triumph recalls a moment of mastery and competence. The content, emotional tone, and details reveal the person's lifestyle blueprint. Analyzing early recollections provides direct access to unconscious lifestyle assumptions. The person doesn't recognize these memories as revealing their worldview or goals. They simply report what they remember from early childhood as requested. The skilled Adlerian listens for themes, repeated elements, and emotional significance. Do the memories emphasize danger or safety, belonging or exclusion, competence or failure? Do other people appear helpful or harmful, present or absent, reliable or unpredictable? These patterns illuminate how the person experiences themselves and their world. Social interest manifests in 3 primary domains corresponding to life's major tasks. In work, it means contributing productively to collective welfare through one's occupation. It means taking satisfaction in useful labor rather than mere personal gain. It involves cooperating with colleagues and considering how work affects others. In friendship, it means developing genuine interest in others' welfare and experiences. It involves learning to see with others' eyes and feel with their hearts. It requires moving beyond self-centered concern to empathic connection and mutual support. In love and intimacy, social interest means equal partnership between 2 people. It involves genuine concern for the partner's happiness and development. It includes cooperation in creating shared life and potentially raising children together. Adler viewed love as requiring the highest development of social interest and cooperation. Sexual attraction alone doesn't constitute love in his framework. Love means commitment to another's welfare and willingness to subordinate ego to partnership. It represents the most intimate expression of human cooperation and connection. Low social interest produces what Adler called the neurotic disposition or lifestyle. The person experiences life as hostile competition where others threaten their security. They view relationships instrumentally, using others for personal advantage without genuine connection. They avoid life's real tasks through symptoms, excuses, or arrangements, ensuring failure. They might pursue superiority through domination, exploitation, or tyrannical control over others. Or they might withdraw into passivity, helplessness, and dependence on others' care. Both patterns reflect the same underlying problem: insufficient community feeling and excessive self-concern. Adler argued that all neurotic symptoms serve a hidden purpose within the lifestyle. They protect the person's self-esteem while justifying avoidance of life's challenges. A person develops anxiety before important examinations or social events. The anxiety prevents optimal performance and provides an explanation for potential failure. If they succeed despite the anxiety, they can feel especially proud of their achievement. If they fail, the anxiety explains the failure without threatening their self-concept. The symptom thus serves as insurance against threats to their fictional final goal. Adler observed that neurotic individuals create a private logic, justifying their behavior. This logic makes perfect sense from within their lifestyle's assumptions and goals. From outside, their behavior might appear irrational, self-defeating, or mysteriously contradictory. But given their underlying convictions and purposes, everything follows logical necessity. A person convinced that others will harm them logically avoids close relationships. A person believing they must be perfect logically avoids situations risking failure. Understanding the private logic makes seemingly bizarre symptoms comprehensible and meaningful. Democratic values pervaded Adler's psychology both theoretically and practically. He believed genuine equality represents the foundation for mental health individually and socially. Authoritarian relationships based on domination and submission breed neurosis and social pathology. Democratic relationships based on mutual respect and cooperation promote healthy development. This conviction led Adler to work extensively in education and social reform. He established child guidance clinics throughout Vienna where parents and teachers learned democratic methods. He lectured publicly to ordinary citizens, democratizing psychological knowledge beyond medical elites. Adler's feminism emerged from his emphasis on equality and social interest. He rejected Freud's theories of penis envy and female biological inferiority entirely. He argued that women's psychological differences from men stemmed from cultural inequality and discrimination. Feelings of inferiority in women reflected genuine social disadvantage, not biological destiny. He advocated for women's equal participation in work, education, politics, and family life. He criticized traditional masculine superiority as psychologically harmful to both genders. True partnership between equals represented healthy development for both men and women. The masculine protest describes attempts to assert superiority through exaggerated, stereotypical masculinity. Men and women both might engage masculine protest when feeling inferior or vulnerable. They adopt aggressive, dominating, competitive behaviors to prove their strength and worth. This reflects the broader culture's valuation of masculine traits over feminine ones. Adler saw this cultural bias as deeply problematic, creating unnecessary conflict and suffering. He advocated for valuing cooperation, empathy, and nurturing alongside achievement and strength. Psychological health requires integrating qualities culturally assigned to both genders. Social interest ultimately represents Adler's criterion for evaluating human progress and civilization. A healthy society cultivates cooperation, equality, and concern for collective welfare. An unhealthy society promotes competition, hierarchy, and individual gain at others' expense. Mental health services should focus on prevention through education rather than remediation through treatment. Teaching parents, educators, and community members strengthens social interests foundations. This prevents psychological problems more effectively than treating established neuroses. Adler's vision was fundamentally optimistic about humanity's potential for positive development. Part 4. The Freudian Rupture and Theoretical Foundations. The split between Freud and Adler represents one of psychology's most consequential intellectual divorces. It wasn't merely personal animosity, but fundamental theoretical incompatibility. The disagreements cut to the very foundations of how to understand human psychology. Examining this rupture reveals the radical nature of Adler's alternative vision. Freud's system was deterministic, mechanical, and focused on past causation. Adler's system was teleological, purposive, and focused on future orientation. These differences weren't reconcilable through compromise or integration. Freud viewed humans as driven by unconscious instinctual forces beyond voluntary control. The libido, sexual energy-seeking discharge, powered all psychological phenomena. Aggression emerged later in Freud's theory as a second fundamental drive. These drives operated mechanically, pushing from behind according to hydraulic pressure principles. The person was essentially passive, buffeted by internal forces and external constraints. Free will was largely illusory, with unconscious drives determining behavior. Self-knowledge meant discovering these hidden forces, not changing one's fundamental nature. Adler rejected this entire mechanistic framework as both theoretically confused and clinically unhelpful. He proposed that humans are creative, goal-directed agents constructing meaningful responses to life. The fictional final goal pulls behavior forward rather than past causes, pushing it. This represents a teleological rather than causal explanation of human action. Teleology means explanation by purposes and ends rather than antecedent causes. A person acts to achieve imagined future states, not merely as effect of prior conditions. This restores genuine agency and creativity to human psychological functioning. The disagreement about sexuality was particularly bitter and irreconcilable between them. Freud insisted that sexuality determines personality, with libidinal energy fueling psychological development. Psychosexual stages supposedly shaped character through fixations at oral, anal, or phallic levels. Sexual conflicts and Oedipal dynamics were universal human experiences requiring analysis. Adler inverted this completely, arguing that personality determines sexuality's expression. The lifestyle, formed by social experiences and creative interpretation, shapes sexual behavior. Sexual problems reflect broader lifestyle issues rather than being primary causal factors. Freud accused Adler of replacing sexuality with aggression as the fundamental drive. This criticism fundamentally misunderstood what Adler was proposing theoretically. Adler didn't substitute one biological drive for another, but rejected drive theory entirely. The striving for superiority wasn't a biological instinct, but a psychological movement toward goals. It reflected the person's creative response to felt inferiority, not mechanical pressure from instinctual energy. The striving was conscious and purposeful, even if its ultimate fictional goal remained unconscious. This represented a completely different kind of psychological explanation from Freud's drive theory. The role of consciousness versus unconsciousness divided the two theorists profoundly. Freud emphasized unconscious processes as the primary determinants of psychological life. Most mental activity occurred outside awareness, with consciousness representing merely the surface. Therapy required making the unconscious conscious through interpretation of dreams, slips, and symptoms. Adler acknowledged unconscious elements but emphasized conscious awareness and intentionality far more. The fictional final goal might be unconscious, but daily behavior remained largely conscious and purposeful. People generally know why they act as they do, even if they don't examine their ultimate goals. Adler argued that the distinction between conscious and unconscious was overemphasized and misleading. They weren't separate realms, but represented what the person currently understands or doesn't understand. What's unconscious today might become conscious tomorrow through reflection or insight. What's conscious might slip back into unconscious automaticity through habit formation. The division is fluid and pragmatic rather than structural and absolute. Therapy makes lifestyle assumptions conscious so people can examine and potentially revise them. But unconscious material isn't buried treasure requiring archaeological excavation through free association. The therapeutic relationship itself reflected fundamental differences between the two approaches. Freudian analysis emphasized neutrality, abstinence, and the analyst's blank screen presentation. The analyst remained mysterious, revealing nothing personal to facilitate transference projections. This asymmetrical relationship mirrored parent-child dynamics, with the analyst holding interpretive authority. Adlerian therapy emphasized equality, collaboration, and genuine human encounter between therapist and client. The therapist shares insights, offers encouragement, and works alongside the client cooperatively. This democratic relationship models the social interest that therapy aims to develop. Freud's pessimism about human nature contrasted sharply with Adler's optimistic vision. Freud saw civilization as necessarily repressive of human instincts, creating inevitable suffering. The best one could achieve was transforming neurotic misery into ordinary unhappiness. Human aggression and selfishness were ineradicable parts of our biological inheritance. Adler viewed humans as having vast potential for positive development and social contribution. Problems arose from discouragement and mistaken learning, not inherent evil or destructive drives. With proper encouragement and education, people could develop cooperation and community feeling. The theoretical differences extended to the therapy's temporal orientation and focus. Psychoanalysis emphasized excavating the past, particularly early childhood traumas and conflicts. Understanding how past events cause current symptoms was considered essential for cure. Therapy thus looked backward, reconstructing developmental history in minute detail. Individual psychology focused on present goals and future orientation more than past causes. Understanding the lifestyle's fictional final goal mattered more than cataloguing childhood events. Therapy looked forward, helping clients choose more constructive goals and develop courage. Adler emphasized that people could change their fundamental life orientation through conscious choice. They weren't prisoners of past trauma or biological drives, but creative agents. Recognizing their lifestyle's mistaken assumptions allowed them to adopt better ones. This required courage, but was entirely possible at any point in life. Freud was more pessimistic about fundamental character change being possible. Analysis might provide insight and symptom relief, but couldn't transform basic personality structure. The person remained largely what their psychosexual development and conflicts had made them. The concept of resistance illustrates further differences in how they approach treatment impasses. Freud viewed resistance as the patient's unconscious defense against threatening material emerging. The analyst must overcome resistance through interpretation, making it conscious so analysis can proceed. Resistance proved the analysis was reaching important unconscious conflicts. Adler understood resistance as the patient protecting their lifestyle from threatening examination. But rather than overcome it forcefully, the therapist respects the patient's need for safety. The therapist encourages the patient gently, building trust until they feel safe enough to change. Dreams represented another area where their interpretations diverged completely from one another. Freud saw dreams as wish fulfillments disguising forbidden unconscious desires. Dream symbols required interpretation through a universal symbolic language plus individual associations. The dream's latent content, hidden beneath manifest content, revealed unconscious truth. Adler viewed dreams as rehearsals for action, aligned with the dreamer's lifestyle goals. They create specific emotional states that justify behavior the person plans to undertake. A frightening dream might justify avoiding some challenge the person wants to escape. Freud demanded theoretical orthodoxy and expelled those who questioned fundamental psychoanalytic doctrines. He created a movement with himself as absolute authority and defectors as heretics. This authoritarian structure contradicted democratic principles and stifled intellectual creativity. Multiple splits occurred following similar patterns throughout psychoanalysis's early history. Adler welcomed diversity of thought and encouraged independent thinking among his followers. Individual psychology never developed the cult-like orthodoxy that characterized Freudian psychoanalysis. This openness may have contributed to Adler's ideas dispersing widely without proper attribution. Freud never forgave Adler for leaving and maintained bitter animosity until death. He dismissed Adler's work as superficial and driven by personal neurosis or character flaws. He accused Adler of plagiarism, while simultaneously claiming Adler's ideas were worthless. His famous comment about Adler's death in Aberdeen dripped with contempt and schadenfreude. Adler took a more measured public stance, acknowledging initial debts while asserting independence. He focused on developing his system rather than attacking Freud personally or professionally. The asymmetry of their animosity reflects different personality styles and theoretical commitments. The rupture between them ultimately benefited psychology by creating genuine theoretical alternatives. If Adler had remained subordinate to Freud, his insights might have been absorbed and diluted. The clean break allowed individual psychology to develop its own internal logic and coherence. It created space for future integrations while maintaining distinct theoretical identities. Modern eclecticism draws from both traditions, though often without recognizing Adlerian sources. The cognitive revolution in psychology owes more to Adler than to Freud, actually. Understanding the split helps clarify which insights came from which theoretical lineage. Part 5. The Therapeutic Revolution. Adlerian therapy represented a radical departure from psychoanalytic technique in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It was brief rather than interminable, active rather than passive, educational rather than archaeological. It focused on encouragement rather than interpretation, strengths rather than pathology, present and future rather than past. These weren't minor technical adjustments, but fundamental reconceptualizations of therapy's nature and purpose. Adler pioneered many approaches that became standard practice decades later in other therapeutic schools. His influence on modern therapy vastly exceeds his recognition in contemporary practice. Examining Adlerian technique reveals how genuinely revolutionary his therapeutic innovations were. The therapeutic relationship began with establishing equality and collaboration between therapist and client. The therapist wasn't an authority figure interpreting the client's unconscious from a position of superior knowledge. Rather, the therapist was a fellow human being offering assistance to someone facing discouragement. This democratic stance reduced shame and resistance while modeling the social interest therapy aimed to develop. The therapist shared observations and hypotheses rather than pronouncing interpretations from on high. The client was encouraged to agree, disagree, or modify the therapist's understanding collaboratively. This created genuine partnership in the therapeutic endeavor rather than hierarchical authority relations. Encouragement represented the central technique and spirit pervading all Adlerian therapeutic work. Discouragement was the universal problem underlying all neurotic symptoms and behaviors. The discouraged person had lost faith in their ability to meet life's challenges successfully. They believed they couldn't achieve belonging or significance through constructive, useful contributions. Encouragement meant helping the client recognize their strengths, efforts, and existing positive qualities. It meant reframing failures as learning opportunities rather than evidence of worthlessness or inadequacy. It meant focusing on what's right with the person rather than cataloguing everything wrong. The therapist actively looked for opportunities to highlight the client's courage and positive movement. Even small steps toward change deserved recognition and support. The emphasis fell on effort and improvement rather than achievement or perfection. This prevented the client from dismissing progress as insufficient or meaningless. Encouragement wasn't empty praise or false reassurance, but genuine recognition of real assets. It helped clients see themselves more accurately rather than through the distorted lens of discouragement. As courage increased, clients became willing to risk changing their lifestyle and facing life's tasks. Lifestyle assessment represented the diagnostic phase of Adlerian therapy, though assessment continued throughout treatment. The therapist gathered information about the client's family constellation, birth order, and early environment. Early recollections revealed the client's fundamental assumptions about themselves, others, and the world. The therapist observed recurring patterns in how the client approached problems and relationships. From this data, the therapist formulated hypotheses about the client's fictional final goal and lifestyle. These hypotheses were shared with the client for collaborative exploration and refinement. The goal was understanding the lifestyle's internal logic and how it created current difficulties. The questioning technique allowed the therapist to explore the client's private logic and lifestyle assumptions. Rather than interpreting from outside, the therapist asked questions helping clients discover their own patterns. Questions like, "What would be different if this symptom disappeared?" revealed the symptom's hidden purpose. Asking, "What's the worst that could happen?" exposed fears, maintaining avoidance behaviors. The Socratic method helped clients examine previously unquestioned assumptions about themselves and their world. As assumptions became conscious, clients could evaluate whether they still made sense. Often, childhood conclusions no longer fit adult realities, but continued operating automatically nonetheless. Insight in Adlerian therapy meant recognizing one's lifestyle patterns and fictional final goals clearly. But insight alone wasn't sufficient for change, contrary to classical psychoanalytic assumptions. The client also needed courage to act differently, despite fear and uncertainty. Knowledge without action left the person unchanged, merely more aware of their problems. The therapist therefore emphasized taking concrete steps toward more constructive living. Small behavioral changes often preceded emotional changes rather than following them. Acting courageously created new experiences that gradually modified discouraging beliefs. Adler used humor therapeutically to deflate grandiose goals and reduce emotional intensity. Gentle humor helped clients see the absurdity of their neurotic arrangements without feeling attacked. It created distance from problems, making them less overwhelming and more manageable. Humor also strengthened the therapeutic relationship through shared laughter and human connection. But the humor was never mocking or belittling, which would increase discouragement. It was warm, accepting humor that acknowledged human foolishness with compassion. This delicate balance required sensitivity to the client's emotional state and readiness. Paradoxical interventions involved prescribing the symptom or encouraging the very behavior clients wanted to eliminate. A client complaining of obsessive thoughts might be instructed to think those thoughts deliberately for set periods. Someone avoiding social situations might be told to continue avoiding, but do so consciously and deliberately. These interventions disrupted the symptom's automatic nature and revealed its purposive character. When done voluntarily, the symptom no longer served its original function effectively. The client realized they had more control than they believed, which challenged helplessness assumptions. Paradoxical techniques required careful timing and a strong therapeutic relationship to work safely. Adler pioneered brief therapy approaches long before time-limited treatment became common practice. He didn't believe therapy needed to last years to produce meaningful change. Often, substantial improvement occurred within months rather than years of treatment. This efficiency reflected the focus on present functioning and future goals rather than exhaustive past exploration. Therapy aimed to restart the client's development by restoring courage and clarifying constructive goals. Once movement resumed, the client could continue growing without ongoing therapeutic support. Follow-up might occur periodically, but wasn't required as continuous long-term treatment. The emphasis on prevention rather than remediation distinguished Adler from most contemporary therapeutic approaches. He established child guidance clinics, where parents and teachers learned to prevent developmental problems. Public education about psychological principles helped families create healthier environments for children. Teaching democratic parenting methods prevented the discouragement that led to later neurosis. This public health approach recognized that treating individual neuroses was insufficient. Social reforms addressing inequality, poverty, and authoritarianism were equally necessary for mental health. Adler saw individual therapy and social change as complementary rather than separate endeavors. Adler conducted many of his therapeutic demonstrations publicly before audiences of parents, teachers, and professionals. He interviewed children and families openly, showing how to understand and encourage them. This democratization of psychological knowledge empowered ordinary people to apply principles themselves. It also reduced the mystique surrounding therapy, making it seem accessible rather than arcane. Critics worried about confidentiality and performing therapy as public spectacle. But Adler believed the educational value outweighed these concerns in carefully selected cases. The public demonstrations showed respect for clients' dignity while modeling therapeutic principles clearly. Group therapy was another Adlerian innovation that later became widespread in other approaches. Adler recognized that group settings provided powerful opportunities for developing social interest. Group members could encourage each other and provide reality testing unavailable in individual therapy. The group became a social microcosm where people could practice new behaviors. Adler particularly used groups with families, seeing the whole family system together. This allowed direct observation of interactions and enabled systemic interventions. Family therapy, as a distinct approach, emerged decades later but reflected Adlerian insights. Educational applications of individual psychology extended throughout the school system comprehensively. Teachers learned to understand children's behavior as goal-directed rather than random or purely reactive. Misbehavior reflected discouragement and mistaken goals requiring encouragement, not punishment. Creating democratic classrooms where students contributed to decision-making fostered social interest and responsibility. Adler emphasized that schools should develop the whole person, not just intellectual skills. Social and emotional learning, cooperation and citizenship were as important as academic achievement. These ideas anticipated modern social-emotional learning programs by several decades. The teacher-student relationship should model mutual respect and cooperation rather than authoritarian control. Natural consequences replaced arbitrary punishments as the primary teaching method. Children learned from experiencing the results of their choices rather than fearing external authority. This developed internal motivation and responsibility more effectively than rewards or punishments. Encouragement helped students develop confidence in their abilities and willingness to persist despite difficulty. Mistakes were reframed as learning opportunities rather than failures requiring shame or punishment. This created safer environments where children could risk trying new things without fear. Adler's work with juvenile delinquents reflected his conviction that all misbehaving children are discouraged children. Criminal behavior represented the most extreme form of mistaken striving for significance. These young people concluded that antisocial behavior offered their only path to belonging and mattering. Punishment only confirmed their view that society was hostile, and they had to fight it. Rehabilitation required encouragement, skill development, and demonstrating alternative paths to significance. Connecting delinquents with positive social groups and meaningful work redirected their striving constructively. Adler was optimistic that even seriously troubled youth could change with proper support and encouragement. Modern applications of Adlerian principles appear throughout contemporary psychotherapy, even without explicit acknowledgement. Cognitive behavioral therapy's emphasis on thought shaping emotions reflects Adler's cognitive orientation. Solution-focused therapy's emphasis on goals and strengths rather than problems echoes Adlerian principles. Motivational interviewing's collaborative, encouraging stance derives from Adlerian technique. Family systems therapy's understanding of family dynamics builds on Adlerian foundations about family constellation. Positive psychology's focus on strengths, meaning and growth parallels Adler's optimistic framework. The breadth of influence demonstrates how comprehensively Adler's ideas permeated modern therapy. Part 6. The Hidden Legacy. Henri Ellenberger famously observed that Adler was borrowed from more than any other theorist without acknowledgement. This intellectual theft wasn't malicious, but reflected how completely Adlerian ideas permeated subsequent psychology. Concepts that seemed obvious or commonsensical were actually revolutionary Adlerian innovations. Tracing his influence reveals a hidden architecture beneath much contemporary psychological theory and practice. The breadth of impact spans humanistic psychology, cognitive therapy, family systems, existentialism, and positive psychology. Each school absorbed Adlerian principles while often forgetting or obscuring their origin. Reconstructing this lineage clarifies psychology's intellectual history and gives Adler proper recognition. Abraham Maslow explicitly acknowledged Adler as a precursor to humanistic psychology's development. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with self-actualization at its apex, echoes Adler's striving for superiority. Both viewed humans as growth-oriented organisms seeking to realize their potential. Both emphasized conscious motivations and future possibilities over unconscious drives and past traumas. Maslow's concept of self-actualization as the highest human need parallels Adler's fictional final goal. The self-actualizing person develops social interest, creativity, and democratic values precisely as Adler described. Maslow stated in 1970 that Adler becomes more correct year by year as evidence accumulates. Carl Rogers developed person-centered therapy, emphasizing unconditional positive regard and empathic understanding. These therapeutic attitudes reflect Adler's emphasis on encouragement and democratic therapeutic relationships. Rogers' trust in the client's inherent tendency toward growth mirrors Adler's optimism about human potential. The non-directive stance and collaborative exploration parallel Adlerian technique, despite different theoretical language. Rogers acknowledged Adler's influence on his thinking about therapy's egalitarian nature. Both rejected authoritarian models where the therapist imposed interpretations on passive patients. Both viewed therapy as genuine human encounter, facilitating the client's self-directed growth. Viktor Frankl developed logotherapy, emphasizing meaning and purpose as primary human motivations. He explicitly positioned his approach as the third Viennese school after Freud and Adler. Frankl contrasted the will to meaning with Freud's pleasure principle and Adler's striving for superiority. Yet his emphasis on future orientation and chosen purposes clearly derives from Adlerian foundations. Frankl worked closely with Adler early in his career before developing his independent system. The continuity between Adler's fictional finalism and Frankl's will to meaning is transparent. Both viewed humans as creative agents constructing meaning rather than passive responders to stimuli. Rollo May and other existential therapists emphasized freedom, responsibility, and authentic engagement with existence. These themes resonate deeply with Adler's emphasis on creative choice and personal responsibility. Existential therapies focus on how people create meaning, parallels. Individual psychology's constructivism. The emphasis on courage in facing life's anxieties echoes Adler's concept of courage, overcoming discouragement. Both approaches rejected deterministic models, reducing humans to effects of prior causes. Both emphasized present choice and future possibility over past causation. The existential phenomenological method shares Adler's interest in subjective experience and personal meaning. Albert Ellis founded rational emotive behavior therapy based explicitly on Adlerian principles. Ellis acknowledged that Adler anticipated cognitive therapy's core insights by several decades. The idea that thoughts create emotions rather than events directly causing feelings comes from Adler. Ellis's ABC model, where beliefs mediate between activating events and emotional consequences, is thoroughly Adlerian. Disputing irrational beliefs parallels examining lifestyle assumptions in individual psychology. Ellis emphasized that people disturb themselves through faulty thinking, requiring cognitive restructuring. This reflects Adler's view that private logic creates neurotic problems requiring conscious examination. Aaron Beck developed cognitive therapy for depression independently but acknowledged Adlerian precursors. Beck's concept of cognitive schemas organizing experience parallels Adler's lifestyle concept precisely. Automatic thoughts reflecting underlying assumptions echo Adler's description of private logic operating unconsciously. Cognitive distortions, like all-or-nothing thinking, represent the same phenomena Adler identified decades earlier. Beck's emphasis on collaborative empiricism in therapy reflects Adlerian democratic therapeutic relationships. The focus on present thinking patterns rather than childhood trauma reconstruction follows Adlerian precedent. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy thus rests on foundations Adler established in the early 20th century. Family systems therapy emerged from multiple sources but owes substantial debt to Adlerian family constellation theory. Murray Bowen's concept of differentiation within the family system echoes Adler's birth order dynamics. Salvador Minuchin's structural family therapy, examining family organization, reflects Adlerian constellation analysis. Virginia Satir's communication-focused approach emphasizes encouragement and positive reframing in Adlerian style. Adler pioneered seeing families together and understanding individual symptoms within family context. He recognized that the identified patient symptoms served functions in the broader family system. Family therapy developed these insights systematically but built on Adlerian foundations. Reality therapy, developed by William Glasser, emphasizes choice, responsibility, and present behavior. Glasser's focus on what people can control now, rather than past causes, reflects Adlerian principles. The emphasis on making better choices to meet psychological needs parallels Adler's approach. Reality therapy's optimism about human capacity for change mirrors Adler's encouragement-based orientation. Choice theory, underlying reality therapy, shares individual psychology's emphasis on purposeful, goal-directed behavior. Both reject the medical model of mental illness as disease requiring treatment. Both view psychological problems as learned patterns requiring better choices and skills. Solution-focused, brief therapy developed by Steve DeShazer emphasizes strengths and future possibilities. This approach asks what's working rather than exhaustively analyzing what's wrong. The miracle question, asking clients to envision life without problems, parallels exploring fictional final goals. Solution-focused therapy's brevity and efficiency reflect Adler's time-limited therapeutic approach. The emphasis on small changes creating larger systemic shifts echoes Adlerian encouragement of incremental progress. Both approaches trust clients' inherent resources and capacity for self-directed change. The similarities suggest direct lineage, though explicit acknowledgement varies. Narrative therapy, developed by Michael White, examines how people construct life stories and meanings. This postmodern approach shares Adler's emphasis on subjective interpretation, creating psychological reality. Externalizing problems to separate them from personal identity parallels. Adlerian reframing techniques. Reauthoring life narratives resembles examining and revising lifestyle assumptions in individual psychology. Both approaches view problems as constructed meanings rather than objective realities or brain diseases. Both emphasize client agency in creating alternative stories and choosing different responses. The constructivist epistemology underlying narrative therapy reflects Adlerian philosophical foundations. Positive psychology emerged in the late 1990s, emphasizing strengths, virtues, and optimal functioning. Martin Seligman positioned positive psychology as correcting psychology's exclusive focus on pathology. Yet Adler made precisely this argument and developed strength-based approaches 70 years earlier. Research on character strengths, resilience, and well-being follows Adler's emphasis on assets over deficits. The concept of authentic happiness and life satisfaction parallels social interest and constructive lifestyle. Positive psychology's optimism about human potential directly continues Adlerian traditions. Seligman never adequately acknowledged this debt, despite the transparent conceptual continuity. Social learning theory, developed by Albert Bandura, emphasizes observational learning and self-efficacy. Bandura's concept of self-efficacy, meaning confidence in one's abilities, echoes overcoming inferiority feelings. The emphasis on how children learn through modeling parallels, Adler's family constellation dynamics. Social learning theory's reciprocal determinism recognizes mutual influence between person and environment. This interactive perspective reflects Adler's view of individuals creatively responding within social contexts. Bandura's work on aggression and prosocial behavior connects to Adler's social interest concept. The theoretical similarities suggest Adlerian influence even without explicit acknowledgement. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby, examines early relationship patterns shaping later functioning. While Bowlby drew more from mythology and psychoanalysis, connections to Adler exist. The emphasis on early relationships establishing working models parallels lifestyle formation in Adlerian theory. Secure attachment, fostering exploration, resembles social interest, enabling courageous engagement with life. Anxious and avoidant attachment styles reflect different compensatory strategies for managing inferiority feelings. The continuity between early and later relationship patterns echoes lifestyle stability across development. These parallels suggest convergent insights about human development's social foundations. Self-psychology, developed by Heinz Kohut, emphasized empathy and self-esteem in psychoanalytic theory. Kohut's focus on narcissistic injuries and compensatory structures parallels Adler's inferiority and compensation concepts. The emphasis on therapist empathy and mirroring reflects Adlerian encouragement and validation. Kohut moved psychoanalysis away from drive theory toward relational and self-focused perspectives. This shift followed the path Adler pioneered when breaking from Freudian orthodoxy. Self-psychology's emphasis on cohesive self-structure resembles Adler's unified lifestyle concept. Kohut's work represents psychoanalysis gradually absorbing Adlerian insights decades after the original split. Interpersonal therapy developed for depression emphasizes relationship patterns and social functioning. The focus on current relationships rather than childhood reconstruction reflects Adlerian priorities. Examining how relationship difficulties contribute to depression parallels, analyzing social interest deficits. IPT's structured, time-limited format follows the brief therapy model Adler pioneered. The emphasis on improving social functioning to reduce symptoms mirrors Adlerian therapeutic goals. Interpersonal therapy's effectiveness for depression validates Adler's social emphasis in understanding psychological problems. The approach demonstrates Adlerian principles operating under different theoretical labels. Motivational interviewing, developed by Miller and Rolnick, emphasizes collaborative exploration of ambivalence. The therapeutic style of expressing empathy and avoiding confrontation reflects Adlerian encouragement. Supporting self-efficacy and optimism parallels building courage and confidence in individual psychology. Rolling with resistance rather than confronting it directly follows Adlerian respect for client autonomy. The emphasis on client agency and self-directed change mirrors Adler's view of creative human choice. Motivational interviewing's effectiveness across diverse problems validates Adlerian therapeutic principles. The widespread adoption shows how Adlerian methods succeed even without explicit theoretical attribution. The hidden legacy reveals a troubling pattern in psychology's intellectual history and development. Adler's ideas became so pervasive they seemed obvious, losing their revolutionary character and origin. Later, theorists rediscovered or reformulated Adlerian insights without recognizing the precedent. This robbed Adler of deserved recognition while obscuring psychology's actual conceptual genealogy. Understanding this hidden influence clarifies which insights truly originated with Freud versus Adler. It also reveals surprising theoretical unity beneath apparently diverse contemporary therapeutic approaches. The common Adlerian DNA suggests more continuity than contemporary eclecticism typically acknowledges. Part 7. Evidence, Critique, and Scientific Standing. Adler's relationship with empirical research presents complex problems requiring careful examination. He developed individual psychology primarily through clinical observation rather than controlled experimentation. His writings emphasized case studies, theoretical exposition, and practical application over statistical validation. This reflected both the era's standards and Adler's priorities regarding psychological knowledge. Early 20th century psychology had not yet established rigid empirical standards dominating contemporary science. Adler valued practical usefulness and clinical insight over methodological rigor and controlled studies. This pragmatic orientation produced rich clinical theory but limited empirical validation. Birth order theory represents Adler's most researched concept, with hundreds of studies examining its validity. Early research often found support for birth order effects on personality and achievement. Firstborns seemed more responsible and achievement-oriented, while youngest children appeared more rebellious and creative. Middle children showed relationship skills and feelings of exclusion, as Adler predicted. However, methodological problems plagued much of this early research severely. Studies failed to control for family size, socioeconomic status, spacing between siblings, or cultural factors. Retrospective self-reports about personality introduced obvious bias and reliability problems. A comprehensive 2010 review examined 200 birth order studies conducted over decades. The authors reported statistically significant relationships between birth order and various personality characteristics. However, they acknowledged excluding studies with non-significant results from their review entirely. This publication bias severely limits confidence in their conclusions about empirical support. A 2015 large-scale study using representative samples found minimal birth order effects on personality. Firstborns showed slightly higher intelligence, but no differences in extroversion, emotional stability, or imagination emerged. Effect sizes were so small as to have negligible practical significance for understanding individuals. The distinction between actual and psychological birth order complicates empirical testing considerably. Adler emphasized that subjective position matters more than objective ordinal position in the family. A third-born child might function psychologically as a firstborn under certain conditions. This interpretive flexibility makes the theory difficult to test empirically in straightforward ways. If predictions fail, Adlerians can claim the psychological position differs from actual position. This makes the theory potentially unfalsifiable, a serious problem for scientific standing. Yet the distinction between objective and subjective position itself represents a valuable theoretical insight. Most research examined actual birth order effects across large samples using statistical methods. This approach cannot capture the interpretive complexity and family dynamics Adler emphasized. Individual case studies might reveal birth order influences not visible in group statistics. But case studies lack the generalizability and objectivity that controlled research provides. This creates a fundamental tension between Adlerian clinical wisdom and contemporary empirical standards. The theory's subtlety and flexibility that make it clinically useful resist simple empirical testing. Whether this represents theoretical richness or pseudo-scientific vagueness remains contested. Cross-cultural research reveals that birth order effects vary substantially across different societies. Most studies examined North American and European populations with specific family structures and values. Collectivist cultures with extended families show different birth order dynamics than nuclear families. Cultures with strong gender role differentiation show different patterns than egalitarian societies. This cultural variability supports Adler's emphasis on social context shaping psychological development. But it also suggests birth order operates less universally than Adler's theory sometimes implied. The interactions between birth order, culture, family structure, and individual temperament prove extremely complex. Research on social interest faces measurement challenges that complicate empirical validation significantly. How do you operationalize and quantify concern for collective welfare reliably? Various social interest scales have been developed, but their validity remains questionable. Self-report measures of social interest may reflect social desirability bias rather than genuine community feeling. Behavioral measures prove difficult to design and interpret without contamination from other factors. Despite these challenges, some research supports relationships between social interest and mental health. Higher social interest correlates with lower depression, anxiety, and various adjustment measures. The lifestyle concept faces similar operationalization difficulties, preventing straightforward empirical testing. Lifestyle represents a complex idiographic pattern unique to each individual. Standardized measures cannot capture this unique configuration adequately by definition. Early recollection analysis provides rich clinical data but resists quantification and statistical analysis. Inter-rater reliability for lifestyle assessments varies depending on training and experience. Skilled Adlerian clinicians might agree on lifestyle patterns, while empirical researchers find poor reliability. This again highlights tensions between clinical utility and scientific validation standards. Neuroscience research provides some support for Adlerian concepts translated into contemporary language. A 2016 review examined neuroscientific evidence relating to individual psychology's principles. The brain's predictive processing aligns with Adler's emphasis on anticipation and fictional goals. Neural plasticity supports the possibility of lifestyle change through therapeutic intervention. Social neuroscience validates the fundamental importance of social connection for human functioning. Mirror neuron systems suggest biological substrates for empathy and social interest. While not proving Adlerian theory correct, neuroscience shows compatibility with core principles. Evolutionary psychology provides alternative explanations for phenomena Adler attributed to social dynamics. birth order effects might reflect reproductive strategies shaped by natural selection, rather than learned responses. Parental investment theory predicts differential treatment based on birth order for evolutionary reasons. Firstborns receive more investment because parents have fewer competing demands initially. These evolutionary accounts don't necessarily contradict Adlerian theory, but offer different explanatory levels. Both psychological interpretation and evolutionary predisposition might contribute to observed patterns. Integrating multiple explanatory frameworks remains an ongoing challenge for comprehensive understanding. Critics argue that Adlerian theory lacks specificity and generates unfalsifiable predictions. The theory can explain any outcome after the fact through interpretive flexibility. Successful compensation, failed compensation, and overcompensation all fit within the theoretical framework. This comprehensiveness might reflect depth, or might indicate the theory explains nothing precisely. Proponents counter that human psychology's complexity requires flexible frameworks rather than rigid predictions. Nomothetic approaches seeking universal laws miss idiographic uniqueness, defining individual persons. The debate reflects fundamental disagreements about appropriate methods for psychological science. The lack of controlled outcome research on Adlerian therapy specifically presents another empirical gap. Few studies compared Adlerian therapy against control conditions or alternative treatments systematically. Most evidence remains anecdotal, consisting of case studies and clinical observations. This doesn't prove Adlerian therapy ineffective, but leaves efficacy undemonstrated by contemporary standards. However, therapies incorporating Adlerian principles show good empirical support under different names. Cognitive behavioral therapy, solution-focused therapy, and motivational interviewing all demonstrate effectiveness empirically. These successes indirectly validate Adlerian principles, even without direct tests of Adlerian therapy per se. The emphasis on encouragement and strengths receives support from positive psychology research. Studies show that focusing on assets produces better outcomes than focusing exclusively on deficits. Interventions building self-efficacy and optimism improve functioning across various domains. This validates Adler's clinical wisdom about encouragement's therapeutic power. Research on growth mindset shows believing abilities can develop predicts greater achievement. This parallels Adler's emphasis on possibility and potential over fixed limitations. The empirical support for these principles vindicates Adlerian approaches even when attribution is absent. Democratic versus authoritarian parenting research supports Adlerian educational principles substantially. Authoritative parenting, combining warmth with reasonable expectations, produces the best outcomes. Authoritarian parenting, emphasizing control and punishment, creates adjustment problems. Permissive parenting lacking structure also produces difficulties, validating Adler's critique of pampering. Natural consequences prove more effective than arbitrary punishment for teaching responsibility. Encouragement promotes better outcomes than either harsh criticism or empty praise. Decades of developmental research validate Adler's educational philosophy empirically. Research on goal-directed behavior and future orientation supports Adler's teleological framework. People do organize behavior around anticipated future states, rather than merely responding to past causes. Goal-setting interventions improve performance across academic, athletic, and professional domains. Implementation intentions, specifying when, where, and how to act, enhance goal achievement. This research vindicates Adler's emphasis on fictional goals organizing behavior. The future pulls us forward through imagined possibilities, not just past pushing from behind. Contemporary motivation science essentially rediscovered and validated Adler's insights about purposive behavior. The scientific standing issue ultimately reflects deeper questions about psychology's appropriate methods. Should psychology emulate physics with universal laws tested through controlled experiments? Or should it embrace interpretive methods capturing human meaning and subjective experience? Adler leaned toward the latter while acknowledging the former's value. Individual psychology represents a human science rather than natural science in the classical distinction. It seeks understanding through interpretation rather than explanation through causal laws. This methodological pluralism may be necessary for comprehensive psychological knowledge. Part 8. Limitations, Misconceptions, and Living Relevance. Every comprehensive theory contains limitations and blind spots requiring honest acknowledgement. Adler's individual psychology, despite its insights and influence, shows multiple genuine weaknesses. Some criticisms result from misunderstanding, but others identify real theoretical and practical problems. Distinguishing legitimate limitations from misconceptions clarifies the theory's proper scope and application. Honest assessment strengthens rather than weakens theoretical understanding and development. It allows preserving genuine insights while acknowledging where the theory falls short. This balanced evaluation reveals individual psychology's enduring contributions alongside its genuine limitations. The optimism pervading Adlerian theory, while therapeutically valuable, sometimes verges on naive. Adler believed nearly all problems stemmed from discouragement, requiring encouragement for resolution. This underestimates biological factors in severe mental illnesses like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. Encouragement and lifestyle analysis cannot cure serious neurological or genetic conditions. Modern psychiatry recognizes that some conditions require biological interventions alongside psychological treatment. Adler's rejection of medical models was warranted for neuroses, but doesn't apply equally to all disorders. The theory works best for problems of living, rather than severe psychiatric pathology. The fictional finalism concept, while insightful, creates problems for rigorous theoretical development. If ultimate goals remain largely unconscious and unexamined, how do we identify them reliably? Different therapists might infer different fictional goals from the same clinical material. This interpretive variability undermines the concept's explanatory power and predictive utility. The theory risks becoming a sophisticated storytelling device rather than scientific explanation. Yet the concept captures something important about how future imagination organizes present behavior. Perhaps accepting limited precision represents the necessary cost of capturing this psychological phenomenon. Birth order theory's simplifications obscure the massive complexity of actual family dynamics. Adler himself warned against mechanical application, but many followers ignored this caution. Popular presentations reduced nuanced observations to crude stereotypes about birth order positions. This vulgarization damaged the theory's credibility and misled people about its actual sophistication. Family constellation encompasses far more than ordinal position, including spacing, gender, parental attitudes. Cultural context, historical period, and socio-economic factors all interact with position. The theory's richness got lost when reduced to simple formulas in popular psychology books. The emphasis on subjective interpretation sometimes slides into problematic relativism. If everything depends on how individuals interpret their situation, objective reality seems to disappear. But some interpretations are more accurate, adaptive, and reality-based than others. A person interpreting normal feedback as persecution shows pathology, not merely different interpretation. Adler recognized this, but didn't develop clear criteria for distinguishing accurate from distorted interpretations. The theory needs better integration of subjective meaning with objective constraints and facts. Balancing interpretive flexibility with reality testing remains an ongoing theoretical challenge. Social interest as the primary mental health criterion proves insufficient for comprehensive assessment. A person might show high social interest while lacking other crucial functioning capacities. Cognitive abilities, emotional regulation, and reality testing matter beyond social interest alone. Conversely, some highly creative individuals show low conventional social interest but aren't necessarily unhealthy. The criterion works well for interpersonal functioning but less well for intrapsychic dimensions. A more comprehensive model would integrate social interest with other psychological capacities. Adler's emphasis on the social, somewhat neglected individual autonomy and self-development's intrinsic value. The theory's scope limitations mean it cannot explain all psychological phenomena adequately. Severe trauma, neurological damage, and biochemical imbalances require explanations beyond lifestyle analysis. Autism, ADHD, and learning disabilities involve neurological differences not reducible to discouragement. Adler's framework illuminates psychological and social dimensions but cannot replace medical or biological understanding. Modern integrative approaches combine Adlerian insights with neuroscience, genetics, and trauma research. This pluralism produces more comprehensive understanding than any single theoretical perspective. Recognizing appropriate scope prevents both overextension and unnecessary rejection of valuable insights. The lack of systematic research and empirical validation limits individual psychology's scientific credibility. Contemporary psychology demands evidence-based practices supported by controlled outcome research. Adlerian therapy, despite clinical effectiveness reports, lacks the research base modern standards require. This doesn't prove the approach ineffective, but leaves efficacy inadequately demonstrated. The field needs more rigorous outcome studies comparing Adlerian therapy to established treatments. Process research examining how Adlerian techniques work would strengthen theoretical understanding. Without this research, individual psychology remains marginalized in mainstream clinical psychology and psychiatry. Common misconceptions about Adler's theory create unnecessary rejection and misunderstanding. The most persistent misconception treats individual psychology as merely neo-Freudian psychoanalysis. This fundamentally misrepresents Adler's complete theoretical break from Freudian foundations. Adler rejected drive theory, psychosexual stages, and the entire psychoanalytic metapsychology. His theory represents an independent alternative, not a modification of Freudian principles. Grouping Adler with Horney, Sullivan, and Fromm as neo-Freudians obscures his originality. Understanding the radical nature of Adler's departure clarifies his genuine contributions. Another misconception reduces Adlerian theory to birth order theory alone. Birth order represents one element within a comprehensive personality and psychotherapy system. Fictional finalism, social interest, lifestyle, and encouragement constitute equally important concepts. Focusing exclusively on birth order misses the theory's depth and integrative complexity. This reductionism results partly from birth order's accessibility to popular audiences. Complex concepts like lifestyle and fictional finalism resist easy popularization. But genuine understanding requires grasping the full theoretical architecture beyond isolated concepts. Some critics dismiss Adlerian theory as common sense, lacking scientific depth or rigor. This objection reveals more about the critic's superficial understanding than the theory's actual sophistication. Ideas seem obvious only after someone articulates them clearly, and they become culturally absorbed. Before Adler, these insights weren't common sense, but revolutionary departures from prevailing views. The appearance of obviousness actually demonstrates how completely his ideas permeated contemporary thinking. Dismissing profound insights as mere common sense commits the fallacy of retrospective inevitability. Genuine common sense would recognize the difficulty of achieving conceptual clarity and practical wisdom. Boundary cases where the theory struggles reveal important limitations requiring acknowledgement. Highly gifted individuals sometimes show exceptional achievement without apparent inferiority feelings driving them. Their motivation seems intrinsic to the activity itself, rather than compensating for felt deficiency. This challenges the universal applicability of inferiority as the primary motivational source. Mystics and contemplatives pursuing transcendence show motivations beyond social interest or superiority striving. Their spiritual goals don't fit easily into Adler's framework focused on practical social living. These cases suggest human motivation's diversity exceeds any single theoretical explanation. Psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder present challenges for Adlerian explanation and treatment. These individuals often show no discouragement or inferiority feelings requiring encouragement. They pursue destructive goals with confidence and without the guilt or shame therapy usually addresses. Encouraging such individuals might actually worsen their antisocial behavior rather than improving it. The theory's emphasis on encouragement assumes people basically want connection and contribution. But some individuals genuinely lack this desire, showing minimal capacity for social interest development. These cases require approaches beyond Adlerian methods, perhaps involving behavioral contingencies and external controls. Severe depression with prominent biological components responds poorly to encouragement alone. Major depressive disorder often involves neurochemical imbalances requiring medication for adequate treatment. Lifestyle analysis and encouragement help but cannot replace biological interventions when clearly indicated. The theory's applicability varies across the spectrum of psychological and psychiatric conditions. It works excellently for adjustment difficulties, relationship problems, and moderate anxiety or depression. It works less well for severe psychiatric disorders requiring comprehensive medical and psychological care. Recognizing these boundaries prevents inappropriate application while preserving legitimate uses. Contemporary relevance of Adlerian psychology appears throughout modern therapeutic practice and theory. The Cognitive Revolution essentially rediscovered Adler's insights about thinking, creating emotional experience. Brief therapy movements adopted Adlerian efficiency and focus on present functioning over past excavation. Positive psychology embraced Adlerian emphasis on strengths, growth, and optimal human development. Family systems therapy built upon Adlerian understanding of family dynamics and constellation. Evidence-based parenting programs teach democratic methods and encouragement Adler pioneered. The pervasive influence demonstrates enduring relevance even without explicit theoretical attribution. Educational applications remain perhaps Adler's most important contemporary contribution. Understanding misbehavior as goal-directed discouragement transforms classroom management approaches. Democratic classroom communities teach social skills and responsibility more effectively than authoritarian control. Social emotional learning programs incorporate Adlerian principles about belonging and contribution. Restorative justice practices emphasize repair and learning over punishment and exclusion. Growth mindset interventions teach that abilities develop through effort, echoing Adlerian encouragement. These applications improve outcomes for millions of children globally each year. Clinical practice continues utilizing Adlerian concepts even when practitioners identify with other orientations. Therapists emphasize client strengths and resources rather than focusing exclusively on pathology. Collaborative relationships replace hierarchical expert models in contemporary best practice. Brief interventions targeting specific goals prove more common than open-ended exploratory therapy. These shifts all reflect Adlerian influence on therapy's evolution over the past century. Integrative practitioners explicitly draw from individual psychology alongside other approaches. Pure Adlerian therapy exists, but Adlerian principles infuse eclectic practice widely. Social justice applications extend Adlerian emphasis on equality and democratic social organization. Community psychology's focus on prevention and social determinants follows Adler's public health orientation. Addressing poverty, discrimination, and social inequality prevents psychological problems more effectively than individual treatment. Adler recognized that individual mental health requires just, equitable social conditions. His advocacy for gender equality, progressive education, and social reform anticipated contemporary concerns. Feminist therapy and multicultural counseling embrace Adlerian values of equality and empowerment. Social justice movements in psychology continue Adler's legacy of linking individual and collective welfare. The digital age creates new applications for Adlerian principles in unexpected domains. Social media platforms involve complex status hierarchies and belonging dynamics Adlerian theory illuminates. Online behavior often reflects compensation for felt inferiority or pursuit of superiority through digital means. Understanding these dynamics helps address cyberbullying, social comparison, and digital addiction. Virtual communities can develop social interest or reinforce isolation depending on their structure and values. Adlerian principles about encouragement and democratic relationships apply to online interactions effectively. The theory's flexibility allows creative application to contemporary technological and social realities. Coaching and leadership development utilize Adlerian concepts to enhance effectiveness and fulfillment. Understanding lifestyle patterns helps leaders recognize their characteristic strengths and blind spots. Developing social interest translates into servant leadership and stakeholder consideration. Encouragement techniques improve team motivation and performance more than criticism or control. Executive coaching often involves lifestyle assessment and goal clarification in Adlerian style. Organizational development applying democratic principles creates healthier, more productive workplace cultures. These applications demonstrate individual psychology's versatility beyond clinical therapeutic contexts. Future developments might integrate Adlerian insights with neuroscience, genetics, and technology more systematically. Understanding how brain plasticity enables lifestyle change strengthens theoretical foundations. Genetic influences on temperament interact with social experiences in shaping developmental outcomes. Neither genes nor environment alone determines psychological functioning, but their complex interaction. Digital tools could facilitate lifestyle assessment and provide personalized encouragement interventions. Virtual reality might offer safe environments for practicing courage and social interest development. These technological integrations could extend Adlerian principles' reach and effectiveness substantially. The core wisdom in individual psychology remains powerfully relevant for contemporary human challenges. We are creative agents, not passive victims of biology or circumstances. We find meaning and fulfillment through contribution to collective welfare, not isolated self-interest. Courage to face life's challenges develops through encouragement, not criticism or punishment. Early experiences matter, but don't determine destiny irrevocably across the lifespan. Psychological problems reflect discouragement and mistaken goals, not inherent badness or disease. These insights offer hope and practical guidance for individuals and societies pursuing better lives. Adler's legacy ultimately transcends specific techniques or theoretical propositions. He offered a humanistic vision of psychology, emphasizing dignity, possibility, and social responsibility. He modeled intellectual courage in challenging orthodoxy and pursuing truth over conformity. He demonstrated that clinical effectiveness and social justice advocacy complement rather than contradict each other. His life and work remind us that psychology should serve human flourishing broadly. It shouldn't merely adjust individuals to unjust social conditions, but help create better conditions. This integrative vision of individual growth and social progress remains profoundly relevant today. The journey through Adler's psychology reveals a comprehensive, coherent, and deeply humane theoretical system. From inferiority feelings to social interest, from fictional goals to democratic living, the pieces interconnect elegantly. The apparent simplicity masks sophisticated understanding of human complexity and possibility. The widespread influence, despite limited recognition, testifies to the idea's power and truth. Understanding individual psychology enriches contemporary practice even for non-Adlerians substantially. It provides historical depth, theoretical alternatives, and practical wisdom often missing in modern approaches. Adler deserves recognition alongside Freud and Jung as depth psychology's pioneering architects. Looking forward, individual psychology offers resources for addressing contemporary challenges across multiple domains. Climate change requires social interest extending beyond immediate self-concern to future generations and planetary welfare. Political polarization needs democratic values and seeing through others' eyes that Adler emphasized. Mental health crises require prevention through education and social change alongside individual treatment. Inequality and injustice demand recognition that individual flourishing requires collective justice and opportunity. These challenges need precisely the integrated individual social perspective Adler developed. His vision of psychology serving human development and social progress grows more relevant, not less, over time.